Obsessed Josie has been harassing my family for years. The story I'm going to share occurred over the course of several years and only recently ended. It affected almost all of the most important people in my life, affecting us even today and likely for the rest of our lives. I wanted to share it so everyone can understand just how out of control a seemingly harmless situation can become. Due to the length of this event, I'll likely break this story up into several parts. First, let me lay it out for you. My brother has always been my closest friend. He is easily the most loving and genuine person I have ever met and is loved by pretty much everyone he meets. Despite this, he hasn't been in many relationships. I think it's partly due to the fact that he's a very all-or-nothing type of guy. When he falls deeply and blindly, a blessing and a curse, I guess. Anyway, the few girlfriends he's had I've known quite well, despite being nearly 8 years younger than him. Most of them have been nice, normal, pleasant girls with the exception of a few. We had high hopes that he'd settle in with a long-term, wonderful girlfriend as he entered his adult life. We had no idea we'd spend 6 years sharing a hell with him, our family, and our close friends, all by the hands of one girl I'll call Josie. I met Josie when I was 11, my brother 19, and she was 17, graduating high school. I remember being surprised to have him introduce her right off the bat as his girlfriend since neither my parents nor I had heard anything about her. But she was kind, warm, an honor student, and beautiful. I admired her immediately. For the first year of their relationship, Josie never seemed off. She was always happy, always kind, and always had good stories to tell. She and I grew closer as she seemed eager to bond with me, and it was like having an older sister. We shared many of the same interests, and friendship came easy between she and I as I was mature for my age, and she was so inviting. But halfway through their second year of dating, we started noticing things about Josie, just small, odd habits she had. If someone was having a conversation with my brother that did not directly involve her or that she wasn't a part of, she tended to insert herself as best she could, sitting closer to my brother, laughing a little louder, calling him away, etc. If any of our family or friends would ask my brother questions about college or future aspirations, she'd grow increasingly uncomfortable and sometimes made comments like, "I hope you have it all planned out, 'cause I'm going wherever you're going." My parents and I would chuckle about these behaviors, assuming that Josie just loved my brother and was a bit protective. We liked her a lot and had high hopes for their relationship. I hate to think now how blind we were. One night, my brother came home late from a party. I was 13 at this time. He was about to turn 21. He walked in the door, our parents were already asleep, but I was up in the living room. I could immediately tell he was upset about something. I asked him what was wrong as he walked into the kitchen. I realized he had a large welt on his cheek. I asked, "What happened to you?" He said, "I got in a fight." "It's cool." This immediately raised suspicion as my brother was as far from the fighting type as you could be. "A fight over what?" I asked. "Josie," he said simply and went to his room. The next morning, he was driving me to my soccer game, and I pried again about what had happened. He didn't answer at first but then said, "Josie is kind of weird." I asked how so. He said, "I don't know. She likes to start things." Josie was a pathological liar apparently. She did it all the time. Looking back, the constant news stories of places she'd been and things she'd done didn't seem to be truthful. That night at the party, Josie had told my brother that another man at the party had attempted to rape her. My brother, being the man he is, confronted him, and he said, "I've never even seen her before," and a fight ensued over the accusation. On the car ride home, Josie said that my brother must have misinterpreted her words and that nothing close to rape had occurred. The lying seemed to be a detrimental bump in the road, and my brother broke things off. After several weeks, Josie contacted me, asking if I wanted to go shopping with her. Having had a good relationship in the past with Josie, I agreed. My parents thought it was strange that a 20-year-old wanted to spend time with her ex-boyfriend's 14-year-old sister, but they let me go anyway. The day started pleasantly. Josie caught me up on her life and asked how I was as well as how my family and brother were. Nothing seemed strange until she began to bring up uncomfortable conversations. She explained to me that she had had a sexually traumatic childhood and that's why she lied so much, but she also aggressively defended herself, saying, "Whatever your brother told you was a lie. He was the one telling lies. That's why I had to break up with him." She seemed to jerk around the conversation from normal to deeply personal and strange topics. She explained in detail a lesbian experience she had had after ending her relationship with my brother and told me that I should try it when I came of age, of course. I became increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation. She noticed and immediately apologized, saying that she really liked being my friend and that she loved my brother and that's why she was acting so crazy. I told her I liked being her friend too and that I understood her feelings. This was a mistake. This is when the phone calls began. It started with just one. She called me a week after we had hung out at 10 p.m. She was sobbing and saying that she was so sad without my brother and that she needed to get him back. Then they happened nightly, later and later each time. I'd be dead asleep at 2 a.m. and receive a sobbing, hysterical, and desperate phone call. I felt so much pity for her that I continued to answer. One call was different than the other, though. She wasn't hysterical, and she wasn't crying. I picked up the phone at 1:30 in the morning and heard a level voice, monotone, Josie. She said one sentence, "Tell your brother I'm going to slit my fucking throat tonight," and then she hung up. I felt numb. I had never experienced it before. No one I knew had ever behaved that way. I texted her over and over again, asking if she was okay and telling her to not do anything. I panicked. I thought I had done something wrong and that since she told me, I would be responsible in some way. The next day, I told my brother what had happened, and he said he'd go to her house to check on her. A week later, Josie arrived at my house arm in arm with my brother. They had gotten back together and seemed as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me and never once mentioned the phone calls she had made to me. I still looked over my shoulder every now and again, but I was preparing for 11th grade. My brother was beginning a new career and dating a new girl, the daughter of a close family friend who he'd grown up with. Dating a new girl, the daughter of a close family friend, who he'd grown up with. Josie started to fade away from our minds for a while. As myself and my friends began to drive, I remember noticing a car quite a bit. You know, the car you see repeatedly around the area you live in. You notice it more than the others because you noticed it once, and now you can't stop noticing it since you know it exists. You know it belongs to someone, but you've never seen the driver, just the car. It was like that. I'd noticed it out of the corner of my eye at a stoplight or out the window of a restaurant as it drove past. I didn't think much of it, but I noticed it pretty much every time I was out walking, driving, and many times with my brother. I didn't understand how often I'd seen it until one day it clicked, and it startled me. It scared me. I saw it parked in my neighborhood, and I remember thinking, that's that fucking car, what is it doing here? We lived in a smaller, older neighborhood. Most of the people who lived there had been there for a long time. We knew a lot of the neighbors, and houses were pretty much never on the market. New people showed up maybe once every 5 or so years, and when they did, most people knew about it. So when an out-of-place but oddly familiar car came, it was a huge surprise to me. I pointed it out to my brother, who had been in the car with me at the time. He said, "Oh yeah, I've seen it a few times." I didn't feel right about it, but I assumed I was being paranoid. A few months later, I was well into school, had a job, and was too busy to let myself worry, even though I did. One day at work, I was wiping down tables in the front of the restaurant, as it was a pretty slow day. Only a few people were in the store. I remember seeing someone standing outside the front doors, just barely visible out the window. I was busy and assumed they were deciding where to have lunch, as another restaurant was directly next to ours, and people did this often. They weren't there anymore, and I assumed they'd gone next door. I went out to clear dishes off the front patio and clean up, and I saw them walking away from the store down the strip of businesses in the plaza. Back inside, as I worked, I noticed the same person walked back and forth several more times. I was wary at this point, as the person seemed to linger for about an hour. I didn't think anything of it afterwards, though. I was a theater student and had to take some time off for a play I was in. Come opening night, I was so burnt out, I didn't notice anything, even if it was out of the ordinary. My family came to opening night, the 4th show, and closing night. Leaving with my family from the 4th show is when I snapped back into my anxiety-ridden reality. That car was in the parking lot. It was parked a few rows away from my parents' car. I had never seen it at my school before, and I knew it didn't belong to any of my castmates. "What does Josie drive?" I asked my brother. "Josie? I don't know, why? That stupid car, it freaks me out. It's like everywhere we are." A few days later, I had an answer. At closing night of my show, I went out into the lobby of the theater to greet everyone when we finished. I hugged my parents and my brother, but I noticed that they all looked distraught. My brother was visibly upset, and my parents were trying to make conversation the way they do to avoid something. "What happened?" I asked. Josie, she was here." I sort of felt the color run out of my face. I didn't know how much what Josie had done had frightened me until then. "Did she leave?" "I don't know," my brother said, "don't worry about it." I went and got my things and remembered how strangely violated I felt that Josie had watched me for the past 2 hours without me knowing she was in the same state, let alone the same building. I decided to go home straight away. We left the building, and there she was. She was looking at her phone, standing at the mouth of one of the hallways in front of the theater. I stopped for a moment, but the 4 of us decided to walk as hurriedly as we could towards the parking lot, hoping to ignore her and breeze past her. She looked different, still skinny, but she wore makeup again. From a distance, she looked almost like the old Josie. But as we got closer, she looked up from her phone and still had the vacant, animal quality to her face. A bit of anger flashed over her face as she noticed us. She looked like she was going to say something, but we all pretended to not notice her and continued on. She followed closely behind us. "Hey, wait a minute." At the front of the school, my brother stopped as we kept walking. I heard him say, "You need to stop." We got to our car and watched them talk from a distance. I wanted to get in our car and leave. My mom and I got in while my dad stood outside. Josie was yelling at my brother at this point. He made his way towards his car. Josie smiled artificially and waved towards my brother, shouting a goodbye to him as he went before storming off to her car. My brother stopped to talk to my dad for a moment, got in his own car, and left after Josie peeled out of the lot in the same car I had been seeing for the past month and a half. "Still just crazy as ever," my dad said as he started the car. "We may need to call the police." We lived a short distance from the school, but I was shaken up and wanted my dad to drive as fast as possible. Every headlight we saw chilled me. I stared at my phone, trying not to look out the window. I nearly dropped it. We reached a street convergence in our neighborhood. At the stop sign to the right of us was her car. "Dad, that's her." He drove straight, and she turned the same direction. "Dad, she's following us." I had never felt quite so panicked. "Call the police, please," my dad said to my mother, his voice as level as ever. I stared out the back window, ducking low in my seat. My dad turned down another street, and she followed again. "I'm going to go in a circle to see if she follows us, okay?" my dad said. I was crying at this point as I came to a realization. For 4 more turns, my mom spoke to a 911 operator, unable to accurately name streets as they were not lit, and it was pitch black outside. I laid across the back seat, listening to my parents yell at each other, frustrated and I'm sure frightened, and my dad curse as she continued to follow more closely. The car was flooded with light as she turned on her brights, the grille of her car almost touching our bumper. My dad turned the mirror away to keep the light out of his eyes and sped the car up. Eventually, the light was gone, and I could no longer hear the drone of her engine behind us. She was gone. We got home 10 minutes later and turned every light in our house on. My dad checked every closet in our back and side yards, carrying his gun with him. "She's been fucking watching me and my brother." I was almost hysterical in my realization. For the past month, Josie had been stalking both my brother and me. Seeing that car had not been a coincidence. She knew what we were both doing. She came to my school function on both nights my family was there, maybe all 3 nights. She knew where I was. She had followed me all over town. She'd been around our neighborhood and had been lurking around my workplace. All of a sudden, the threats became real. Josie was no longer afraid of crossing boundaries, if she ever had been. We were now in the middle of a full-blown nightmare. My family was no longer safe. She had gone away to cure one disease, but returned having fed and grown another. She was our personal terrorist with the power to single-handedly pull our everyday lives apart, and she had already begun to do just that. What may seem like the plot of a bad horror movie, the psychotic ex-girlfriend wreaking havoc, became our reality times 10. I cannot express to you how terrible it is to be kept awake by something you cannot see but you know exists and is waiting for you when you get out of bed. I never expected a human being could terrify me more than any horrible monster or boogeyman. Those things don't exist. I'm sharing this ordeal to help others understand warning signs and pressure those who see them to take action to protect themselves. Despite the terror of that night, this was only halfway. Year 5 of 6, and things would continue to approach a boiling point. I will upload part number 3 of Josie sometime in the next day or two. Thank you so much for taking the time to read my story. Now, having written it, I see just how severe it was. Update 2, Obsessed Ex has harassing my family for years. Hello again, this will be the final posting of my Josie story. Please feel free to read parts 1 and 2. It will follow the final year and a half of my 6-year struggle with a mentally unstable individual. My family, though strong, is still recovering. After we told my brother about what Josie had done the night after my show, he finally began to confide in me the details of his relationship with Josie. She had come to his high school as a sophomore during his senior year. She immediately caught the attention of my brother and his friends, as she was beautiful and expected to be reserved as a new student. However, my brother recalled his female friends saying she was aggressive in trying to make friends and liked to talk about how her family had moved here from an affluent community in Texas so elite that it didn't have a name. Many of his friends also had gotten strange vibes from her and pinned her as a weird, snobby girl right away. My brother met her again a few years later when she came into where he was working at the time and said how she had seemed to mature vastly. He took her on one date, and almost immediately she wanted to officiate their relationship. He thought it was a bit forward, but didn't hesitate because she impressed him with her elegant way of speaking, kind words, and pretty face. However, he noticed red flags only a few weeks into their relationship. Josie was very insecure, constantly asking my brother if he still had feelings for her, if he was angry with her, and if he thought she was attractive enough. Eventually, this insecurity took a different shape. Josie would send my brother unsolicited nude pictures of herself in the middle of the day, attached to messages asking if he still liked the way her body looked. If my brother went a period of time in their conversations without calling her beautiful or telling her how nice she looked, Josie would point this out. If he protested in any way, she'd become emotional and claim he didn't love her anymore. This behavior mellowed until the end of the 2nd year of their relationship. This is when the narcissism became apparent. Josie would often talk lowly of my brother's previous girlfriends and female friends, boasting about how much more attractive she was than them. Josie refused to attend several events my brother asked her to go to, like my birthday dinner or our aunt's funeral, because she wouldn't know anyone and would have no one to talk to. She also enjoyed referring to herself as a princess and wanting to constantly be doted upon. She often argued with my brother about him spending time with his friends without her because she didn't understand why he wanted to be around anyone but her. She was 100% convinced she would one day be a celebrity and marry my brother. At this point, I was in disbelief that my brother, a smart, kind, and good-looking man, was wasting any more of his time with a girl who behaved like that. However, anytime my brother hinted at wanting to end the relationship, Josie would fly off the handle, becoming belligerent, and promising to kill herself. My brother was trapped by the fear of her harming herself. He'd often think that she was simply bluffing and wouldn't actually do anything, but one day he discovered several bottles of prescription pills in Josie's home. He asked her about them, and she told him that they were antidepressants prescribed to her after the death of her brother, a brother who he later found out never existed. Eventually, Josie began to become angry when my brother would want to spend time with his family without her around. He also told me that Josie fixated a lot of that anger on me. Once, she proceeded to refer to me as a bitch and made comments and theories about how my mother must have had an affair, of which I was the product because I was so ugly and my brother was not. So, my brother decided it was time to end it, no matter what. This information troubled me as all of her actions following that, asking me to spend time with her, wanting to be my friend, showing up at my school, and the phone calls, seemed heinous, ill-intended, and even more psychotic than they had been at the time. But for the final year and a half of our ordeal with Josie, psychotic could not begin to explain what she did to us. I slept little in the weeks following the car incident. My brother, who lived across town, visited and called more regularly. I suspected he felt as uneasy as I did. The nights I did sleep, I often sweat through nightmares of girls with axes or gowned women standing at the foot of my bed or in my window. One night in early December of 2015, it was a rainy and particularly windy night. I wanted to let the cold air in, and I thought that the sound of rain would help me sleep, so I cracked the window only enough to where it could reach the second latch. I also placed the piece of wood my father had cut to help with security behind the window. I pulled my curtain in front of the window, leaving the cracked part of the window uncovered to allow air to pass the heavy blackout curtain. I remember waking from sleep, vaguely hearing a foreign noise against the roof outside my window. My room was on the second floor of our house. Our house had 3 levels, and the second story was only 6 or 7 steps up from the primary floor of our house. All of the spaces were different levels, but the bedrooms were the highest, slightly lower than they'd be in a classic 2-story home. What I'm getting at is that my room was hard to get to from the outside, but not if you were aware of the parts of our home and the access points from other roof levels over the living room and garage. I shook the noise off as it was storming and I thought maybe some leaves or branches were moving around. I turned over to face the wall opposite my window. Not even a second later my room was illuminated by a surge of white light. I shot up in bed. I was momentarily paralyzed with horror. Every one of my limbs felt as if they were floating as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Then again, myself and every item in my room became a black silhouette as another flash filled the space. I threw the blankets off of me and ran as fast as I could down the hallway. I was screaming so loud I surprised myself. I ran into my dad as he threw open his bedroom door. He was panicked and held me by my shoulders in the doorway to their bedroom and yelled at me to tell him what was wrong. "Someone was taking pictures of me through my window," I said. The roof and house were checked, and they of course found nothing and no one. My mother sat up with me and asked every basic question a parent asks. "Were you dreaming? Are you sure it wasn't lightning?" There was no thunder, and I was sure there had not been at the time it happened. The flashes did not have the same hue as lightning. I had taken enough cell phone pictures in my life to identify the flash of a camera. I don't know if they believed me then, but I would eventually have proof that would astonish them. My brother adopted Basil in January of 2016. Basil was a 2-month-old Chesapeake Bay Retriever with 1 gold eye and 1 green eye. He had a very distinct white marking on his chest that looked like an hourglass and a white sock on his front left paw. Basil was the love of my brother's life, aside from his now fiancée Marnie. Basil would end our torture just 3 months later. The holidays and my brother's engagement to Marnie, who was amazing, beautiful, and whose family we had known all our lives, had lifted my family's spirits immensely. My brother was starting his family, almost done with the police academy, and seemed untouchable by any memory of Josie. We felt optimistic for the first time in a long time. Josie hadn't been around to our knowing in several weeks. All was normal, and things were looking up, but that again didn't last. A month or so after bringing him home after letting him into the backyard for a few minutes by himself, Marnie told us that Basil had escaped from the yard. She panicked and ran around the neighborhood looking for him. She got in her car, called me upset, and drove around the block looking for him. She picked me up, and I helped her look in the creek area behind where my brother's house was. We couldn't find him. However, when we arrived back at my brother's house, Basil was sitting on the front porch. We were relieved as he was unharmed and seemed to be as happy as ever, despite missing his collar. I helped Marnie check the yard for ways he could have gotten out. We both decided he must have shimmed through a small gap in the gate on the side yard. I couldn't help being confused to find no grass or burrs in his fur. We thought nothing of it. A few weeks later, both my brother and Marnie were going on a weekend trip with some friends, and I offered to take care of Basil. They dropped him off on the Friday before the 3-day weekend. Basil was happy to play with our older lab, Milo. The second night he was with us, I was out with friends, and my dad had let both the dogs into the yard at around 8 p.m. He sat in his chair in the living room, watching a show with my mom. They say they remember hearing Milo barking because he yelled for him to be quiet, but they assumed the puppy was riling him up. A few minutes later, Milo came to the door to be let in. He ran inside and barked at my dad. My dad was confused as our dog, Milo, was not a regular barker. He called for Basil, but he didn't come. My dad went out and looked around in the bushes and still did not find him. He became concerned and hurried into the house to get a light. He checked the swimming pool and still did not find him. My mother joined him, and they both scoured the large yard but did not find him. When I got home, they had just finished searching the front and side yards. I told them that he had escaped once before, so we decided to take the car to look for him. As we drove around yelling for him, attracting the help of a few neighbors, I thought how strange it was that such a well-behaved puppy had suddenly become a master escape artist in the past 3 or so weeks. Our yard had seen 3 or so dogs grow up in it, some younger and smaller than Basil, and we had never had that problem. The fences were high and well-built, and my dad had replaced the ones on the side of the house just a few summers ago. We did not find him. I hoped that he'd return that night like he did last time, but he didn't. I informed my brother on Sunday and proceeded to look all day in surrounding areas, the pound, shelters, vet clinics, and even looked to the sides of roads for bodies. We found nothing. My brother was heartbroken. I helped him make flyers to post in our neighborhood and his. A couple weeks passed, and we heard nothing. My dad was doing yard work in mid-February. He came in after a few hours and set something on the kitchen table. "What's that?" I knit my brow as I saw it. "It's Basil's collar. It was in the front yard. I almost hit it with the mower. You'll have to take it to your brother." It was Basil's collar, his first collar, not the one he had been wearing the night he went missing from our yard. It was his puppy collar which he had lost the day he got out of the yard at my brother's house. I called Marnie and asked her if they had found it, and she said they hadn't and had bought him a new one. That's when it clicked. Someone had stolen my brother's dog, and not once but twice. I told my brother, Marnie, and my parents my theory, and it was not a difficult one for them to understand. It had to be connected to everything else, right? When we thought she was out of our lives, we decided to take it to the police to add to our case file on Josie. I also told them about the night I had been photographed from my window. The police, like many times before, told us they could not do anything as there was no proof she had done any of these things. Frustrated, defeated, and frightened again. But a few short weeks later, in April of 2016, new developments would finally end it all by a complete godsend coincidence. Marnie was with her mother in a small town 45 minutes away from ours. We were planning for my 17th birthday that month, and so preoccupied we almost put Josie and the fact that she undoubtedly had been watching us for months and had stolen, probably killed my brother's puppy and thrown his collar in our front yard to help us connect the dots and give her credit for the crime. However, while Marnie window shopped in the center of the town, she and her mother noticed a car parked on the street, a car with a puppy in it. It was a bit warm out, so they walked to the window and peeked in at the animal. Marnie immediately recognized him by his eyes and the marking on his chest and the fact that he began crying as soon as she called his name and he saw her. She phoned the police, phoned my brother, and sat on the back trunk of her car. The police arrived as the owner of the car came back to it. The girl was immediately upset by the presence of the police and Marnie's angry accusations. The girl was not Josie, and she became rather helpful. The girl said that she had purchased the dog only a few days ago from an ad online. She told police that the girl she purchased him from was super shady and eager to get rid of the dog, who was skinny and at a very cheap price. The girl who had sold her the dog claimed that she didn't want the stupid dog, it was a present from her boyfriend, but it was the wrong kind. Josie had always liked small dogs. She told the police that she had met the girl to purchase the dog at an apartment complex a few minutes from where they were, but that she wasn't sure what apartment the girl lived in. The police, after Marnie had informed them of our situation, used Josie's name to find out that she indeed lived in the apartment complex with 2 roommates. They interviewed Josie's roommates the next day, but Josie was not there. They told detectives that they almost never saw Josie. Her room was always locked, and she was almost always gone. She didn't have a job, but she claimed to have one, and her mother was there a lot, checking up on her and dropping off her rent to them. However, when they did speak to her, she talked a lot about her past relationship and switched between how much she loved him and his family to how they all deserved to die and were going to hell. With the information given by the girl who had purchased Basil and by Josie's roommates, the police finally had sufficient evidence to search Josie's apartment. I don't know much about what they found, but what I do know horrified my family and horrified me. On Josie's computer, they found hundreds upon hundreds of pictures of my brother, my parents, Marnie, and me, our cars, our houses, my school, my brother's school, and Basil. Pictures taken through our windows at night, pictures of us sleeping, photos taken from our social media, vacations, the picture of my brother's proposal to Marnie. She had even doctored herself into some of them. She still had pictures of her and my brother, and her with my family, up around her room. She had kept Basil in her closet for weeks on a towel, with just water and little food. In her search history, they found everything from rape fantasy and other violent pornography to weapon research. The police now had sufficient evidence to arrest Josie. Josie had been obsessively stalking my family for more than 2 years. She had stalked us from her car, following us around town. It had been her snapping photos of me from the roof outside my window. She had watched my brother drop me off at our house. She had documented her opinions of us, our habits, and her plans in a journal, which we will not get to see until the case is taken to trial next month. My brother, myself, my father, the girl we found Basil with, Josie's roommates, several of my brother's friends, and Josie's mother will testify against her. It will be the first face-to-face interaction any of us will have had with her in many months. I am terrified, and I am angry. I'm angry that an evil, narcissistic, malevolent, psychotic parasite like her had latched onto my brother, onto my family, and single-handedly stripped us of our security, our sanity, and our trust. Every creak, every bump, every unknown face, and every vehicle following too closely will send me into a tailspin of dread, and I'll see her again, standing in my front yard in her dress and looking up to the sky with a vacant, animalistic gaze. My life became a real horror story, not because of a haunted house or an axe-wielding murderer, but because of a sick girl with a broken mind and a fixation on something unattainable. I'm 17 years old, and I've experienced an ordeal most will read and think is a sad attempt at a thrilling fiction post. My family is healing. I'm healing. And she did not break us. I hope that this story helps anyone who has gone through something similar feel not so alone. I hope that those of you who read this and think of someone who shows the same warning signs as Josie did are now prepared to take action to protect yourselves. Don't wait until things get as bad as they got for me. Be aware of the power of mental instability and the danger behind it. As our trial happens and we learn more, I may update this posting with more information. I can't thank you all enough for the support you've given me as I've posted my ordeal. I'm relieved to have written it all into the words I could not find in these past 6 years of my life. I'm stronger from it.